You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Monday the 1st of September 2014. 13 years ago, Arshid Hussain was accused of abusing 18 girls in Rotherham and police dismissed concerns. Milton Keynes taxi rape row, sex crime taxi driver still working. British rock singer and mum of two Sally Jones in Syria fighting for Islamic State. 9 arrested after Chelmsford immigration raids at Omar's Tandoori and Yasmin Indian Brasserie. Mohammed is the most popular name in Oslo. EU threatens Russia with more sanctions. Turkish festival funds Rochester New York mosque. Ukraine crisis clashes near Luhansk airport ahead of talks. Thought for the day, is it too little, too late? And finally, 2 for 1 day Monday. UK news. 13 years ago, Arshid Hussain was accused of abusing 18 girls in Rotherham and police dismissed concerns. Now, though officers are investigating Hussain, who these days is confined to a wheelchair following a shooting. 18 girls, some as young as 12, allegedly named Arshid Hussain as their boyfriend in interviews with social workers in 2001. But Hussain was not questioned about the allegations and police are only investigating the 39-year-old father in the wake of last week's report into the Rotherham scandal by Professor Alexis J. Yesterday, one alleged victim said it was unbelievable young girls had not been protected. The former deputy leader of Rotherham Council, Jahangir Akhtar, is a cousin of Hussain and lives a few doors from his family home. Mr Akhtar was accused in a report in the Times last year of helping to arrange a deal where Hussain returned one of his young alleged victims who had gone missing from home to the police. Mr Akhtar has denied protecting Hussain or knowing about any inappropriate relationships. Milton Keynes taxi rape row, sex crime taxi driver is still working. Milton Keynes council leader Peter Marland said he thought Milton Keynes cabs were safe. A taxi driver convicted of sexual offence has not had his taxi licence taken away, the council has said. He is one of 7 Milton Keynes drivers found to have criminal convictions in a council investigation. The inquiry came after a convicted rapist had both his private hire and hackney carriage licences revoked last week. A council spokesman said the issue was at its highest priority and it was preparing to interview all drivers it had concerns about. The driver, convicted of 4 sexual assaults including rape, had been issued with a private hire vehicle licence in September 2011 despite councillors knowing of his convictions. He was granted a hackney carriage licence last March. Both licences were revoked last week after a member of the public raised concerns about him. Liberal Democrat Mayor Subhan Shafiq stepped down after he was found to have personally vouched for the convicted rapist, describing the man as being of good current character. The chairman and vice chairman of the licensing committee, Gladstone Mackenzie and Stuart Burke, have also resigned. World at 8. Will the rapist cab driver be deported or fined? No, nothing will happen to him. He will just vanish into the black Asian economy on our benefits. British rock singer and mum of two Sally Jones in Syria fighting for Islamic State. Mum of two Sally Jones is thought to be a former rock singer in her 40s from Chatham, Kent, who was once the lead guitarist in a 1990s girl band. But she now lives in the Syrian town of Raqqa using the name Hussein al-Britani or Sakina Hussein after converting to Islam and taking up ISIS fanatical views. On one Twitter profile claiming to belong to Hussein al-Britani, she posts, quote, proclaiming that the only religion is Islam and calling on others to fight them till all opposition ends. And last week another message said, "My husband is away at training camp at the moment refreshing his kafar killing skills. Don't cry though, he'll be back soon, smiley face." Her husband, who she met online, is believed to be extremist Junaid Hussain, who travelled to Syria while on police bail, suspected of violent disorder. World at 8, I give up. We let them in, educate them, let them marry and then let them go off to fight against Christianity and unbelievers. Nine arrested after Chelmsford immigration raids at Omar's Tandoori and Yasmin Indian Brasserie. 9 illegal immigrants have been arrested following Home Office raids at Indian restaurants in Hatfield, Peveril and Great Baddow. Immigration officers ambushed Omar's Tandoori in the street, Hatfield, Peveril, on Bank Holiday Monday, August 25th, before arresting 4 Bangladeshi staff. 2 aged 28 and 21 have been detained on suspicion of overstaying their visas, while a 35-year-old and 29-year-old have been released on immigration bail for entering the UK illegally. That same night the officers descended on the Yasmin Indian Brasserie in Baddow Road, Great Baddow, before arresting 5 staff. Both businesses now face potential penalties of up to £20,000 for each of the illegal workers if owners cannot prove they carried out sufficient checks. Lee Clark from Home Office Immigration Enforcement said, "Operations like these are carried out across the UK every day as our work to arrest, detain and remove immigration offenders from the UK continues. Employers who use illegal labour are cheating the taxpayer, undercutting genuine employers and denying legitimate job hunters work. Those who willfully flout the rules will face heavy financial penalties. I would urge anyone with detailed and specific information about suspected immigration abuse to get in touch. Anyone with information about suspected immigration abuse can contact https://www.gov.uk/report-immigration-crime or call Crime Stoppers on 0800 555 111. European news. Mohammed is now the most popular name in Oslo. For the first time in Norway's capital city's history, Mohammed is the most common name for boys and men. Statistics Norway has counted the population of Oslo and found that Mohammed is the most common male name in Oslo for the first time ever. Altogether, 4,801 boys and men are named Mohammed or variations of Mohammed as their first name, and Mohammed has thereby passed both Jan 4,667 and Per 4,155. The name has spent 4 years in a row at the top of the list of baby names in Oslo, but this is the first time that Mohammed tops the men's name list for Oslo as well. World date, this is old for us in the UK as we passed that milestone a couple of years and around 1 million migrants ago. EU threatens Russia with more sanctions. Despite tough rhetoric decrying Russia's increasing military involvement in Ukraine, European Union leaders on Sunday stopped short of imposing new sanctions against Moscow right away. Instead, the 28-nation bloc's heads of state and government tasked their executive body to urgently prepare tougher economic sanctions that could be adopted within a week, according to EU summit chairman Herman Van Rompuy. The decision on new sanctions will depend on the evolution of the situation on the ground, but everybody is fully aware that we have to act quickly, he added. The EU leaders call on Russia to immediately withdraw all its military assets and forces from Ukraine, they said in a joint statement. NATO said this week that at least 1,000 Russian soldiers are in the Ukraine. Russia denies that. NATO also says Russia has amassed some 20,000 troops just across Ukraine's eastern border, which could rapidly carry out a full-scale invasion. The fighting between the military and Russian-backed separatists in eastern Ukraine has so far claimed 2,600 lives, according to UN figures. The US and the EU have so far imposed sanctions against dozens of Russian officials, several companies, as well as the country's financial and arms industry. Moscow has retaliated by banning food imports. World date. Wait till the gas stops and the EU won't bother to help the UK at all, as ever. It's a one-way street in Europe for us. World news. Turkish festival funds Rochester, New York mosque. Roughly 100 people took in the sights, sounds and smells of Turkey for the 19th annual Turkish Arts and Folk Festival Sunday afternoon. Traditional Turkish folk music carried over the grounds of the Turkish Society of Rochester, 677 Bean Road, while community members warmly greeted and offered homemade food to those who arrived. "Everyone serving food looks like they're having a lot of fun," said George Bernetti, 17, of Honey-O Falls, who came to the festival with his mother for a cultural educational experience. "We probably won't ever go to Turkey, so we came here," said Joan Bernetti, George's mother, as she sat down to enjoy her food. "I'm going to get some of these recipes to try at home." President-elect of the Turkish Society of Rochester, Ali Yavaz Kalik, said the purpose of the festival was to bring together the Turkish community and welcome others who may not be as familiar with the culture. All proceeds from the festival go towards building the first traditional Turkish mosque in Rochester, according to Kalik. Construction on the mosque had begun at the Turkish Society of Rochester premises just a few hundred yards from the festivities. Ukraine crisis clashes near Luhansk airport ahead of talks. Ukrainian forces are battling pro-Russian rebels at the international airport of the eastern city of Luhansk, a Ukrainian military official has said. The separatists earlier claimed they had seized the airport, but the army said the fighting was still ongoing. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has urged negotiators meeting later in Belarus to make an immediate ceasefire their priority. Some 2,600 people have died in eastern Ukraine since fighting began in April. The conflict broke out after Russia's annexation of Ukraine's southern Crimea Peninsula in March. The rebels have been gaining ground on Ukrainian forces in recent days, both in Luhansk and Donetsk regions, and further south around the port of Mariupol. Pro-Russian rebels have been gaining ground on Ukrainian forces in recent days. Residents in the strategic port city of Mariupol held an anti-Russia rally over the weekend. Ukraine in the West blames Russian military support for the rebel advances, saying armoured columns have crossed the border, allegations rejected by Russia's President Vladimir Putin. He has accused European leaders of ignoring the Ukrainian army directly targeting civilians. Thought for the day: is it too little, too late? Our media have done it again. In advertising the failings of the establishment and our culture, they've also got it wrong. Whilst appearing to give way to popular opinion, more misinformation appears. Rather like Afzal and his white-only harassment under the codename U-Tree, we Brits have apparently just realised what's happening up north of the Thames. Muslim sexual grooming has reared its very ugly head again, and even now, in the light of all condemnations, name-calling and various yells for resignation, it's all too late. Why, you may ask yourself? Well, the reason is this. Many years ago, in fact in 2003, Blackpool appeared to have a few cases of missing girls, and of course the Charlene Downs murder came to light, many years before any reporter did a job on Rotherham. The Downs case was of course hushed up and buggered up by the plods deliberately, and in essence the terrible practice of Muslim sexual grooming went underground, or in fact never existed for the public, for another 8 years. Anne Cryer was the whistleblower, and she paid the price of being called all the names under the sun that the media and public reserve for people, any people, who dare to mention the word Islam, Muslim or Pakistani communities in a less than favourable light. It was then that our Nick Griffin went public and on the streets announcing these crimes, which were even then mainly perpetrated by Muslims of Pakistani origins. He and the British National Party and later the EDL were accused of being racist and inciting racial hatred, and even worse for the multiracial hellhole that is the north of this country, promoting unrest within the Muslim communities. And that is something one must never ever do. In fact, a couple of court cases later and that point was cleared up. But where were the media during this time? In hiding, one would say, and remained that way until 2010, and of course had even remained so during the disappearance and murder of Charlene Downs in 2003 and the subsequent vanishing of Paige Shivers, in which the police and press were mysteriously struck down with the blank virus, and the fact that we in the UK did not have a too many Muslim problem in many areas of the UK. I made a report from the CROP, Coalition for the Removal of Pimping conference, which I attended under the Profan banner, made possible by Nick and the European Union. And I would say now that most of the bodies appearing in the news and the papers attended this conference as well, and all were equally evasive over whom was actually to blame for these crimes. CROP was also attended in Leeds by several local imams and a Muslim boys club guy, all frantically paddling underneath the water. At the inevitable Q&A time, a lady who had the temerity to ask why, as the BNP had raised this question many years ago, had nothing been said. It wasn't me, but she was rushed out of the room by their security, never to be seen again at the various breaks we had for refreshments for the official retards, of course. No ham or pork, as even though many of the Muslims present came from the large Muslim community up in Leeds, Crop bent over backwards to accommodate them. Talk about Trojan horses and Greeks bearing gifts. Just listen to what Hilary Wilmer, representing a Leeds-based support group for parents of sexually exploited girls, the Coalition for the Removal of Pimping Crop, was quoted as saying. The vast majority of perpetrators are Pakistani Asians, with sources inside Crop claiming a percentage as high as 80%, although, the Independent noted, Kurdish, Romanian and Albanian gangs were also involved. Wilmer added, "We think this is the tip of the iceberg," though she cautioned against treating the matter as a race crime. It's a criminal thing. But by May 2012, according to the Independent, Crop had suddenly gone silent concerning the percentage of abusers of Asian origin who had come to the organisation's attention. Wilmer explained to the paper, "We've been accused of being a cover for the BNP. Nazir Afzal, who as a newly appointed chief Crown prosecutor decided to bring the case to trial, said the gender, not the race, was the key issue. There is no community where women and girls are not vulnerable to sexual attack, and that's a fact." He is also quoted as saying, "It would appear that some of the perpetrators were from the Pakistani communities, but not many." My full Crop report is available on asking from South East Sec at bnp.org.uk. The point in question is that the authorities are still avoiding the main issues, which are, why have so many people of one alien religion been allowed to settle in vast numbers in most of our northern cities? This has been the basis and the hub of Muslim sexual grooming for many, many years. On talking to a social worker in Leeds, she told me that her mother remembers cases 30-odd years ago when the first Muslim migrants had formed communities in that city. It was viewed as part of their culture and was ignored. The point that even now these girls are referred to as vulnerable is deeply suspicious, as although few are in council care, many are not and come from normal homes and families, which is why they are so open to being threatened because of their families. If they all came from care homes, this particular threat would have no impact at all. But of course the media would have had to accept that these rapes were endemic throughout the large towns in the North and Midlands, and which in essence they are doing even in the contained area of Rotherham. The methodology is always similar. Most very young girls are approached at schools by their fellow Muslims of the same age. It progresses until they meet the family syndrome, by which time they're either hooked on the new older brother or cousin, booze and drugs, and sneaking out from their homes to be dropped back later by car when their bodies have been used and often abused. It is a sorry and awful state of affairs, and one of which, because of our diversity-fueled society, has remained verboten until now. There has been and still is a terrific cover-up, and although a few heads may roll, you can rest assured that the main criminals, like the so-called British jihadis, will remain secret, safely confined within their communities who, it would appear, have known and encouraged these acts for many, many years. We now know from our own short and nasty history with Islam that if it is committed by a Muslim against a non-believer, as in all the sexual grooming cases in the UK, it is okay. It brings in money to the families, it provides a sort of work for those claiming benefits, it services their men, young, middle-aged and elderly, without encroaching on their womenfolk. And it was said at Crop that many Asian men have arranged marriages which prove culturally different, so having and abusing these underage children provides them with an outlet. Once you've heard that in person, nothing remains the same, does it? Certain societies and committees and groups set up to help, in fact, do very little. Crop itself is, or was, as I haven't heard much from them for the last couple of years, biased. In the very expensive Crop Bible of Trainers Toolkit, which is supporting parents and carers of sexually exploited children, there is no mention of being wary of Asians or Muslim gangs, or for parents to be aware of where or whom their children are mixing with at schools or clubs. In the 3 books now being allowed in local libraries, no names or nicknames are given from the authors, and certainly no mention of Islam at all. Honour killings, as in the case of Laura Wilson, was a cover-up for the murder of this child, who had already borne a baby to her groomer by the baby's father and his cousin. Honour was not the word to use in this crime, but still the media fleetingly referred to it as just that, the first honour killing. In this country today there are at least 3 generations of abused, frightened and ruined young lives, and it is the fault of the great British public who have put up with what small amount of facts have come out, ignored the voices in the wilderness of course, and have discovered, too late, that it is mainly Muslims that commit these awful acts. You have to ask yourself, how much responsibility lies with the public for allowing their own to be raped when not even the ethnicity or religion of these rapists and defilers has allowed for years not to be known? How much longer will we put up with a culture and religion that abuses, kills, rapes, spreads and threatens normal children and their families? These people are strangers to our lands, and you only have to look at the countries they occupy to realise that we are all in danger here. There seems to be a blanket of protection around them. No one must aggravate them. No one must be seen to tell the truth. It will offend them and no one can raid their houses, take their possessions, arrest them or deport them, as they are clearly entitled to a human right which they have denied their victims. It isn't the care homes, it isn't their parents, and it isn't society as much as the people who commit the crimes. In days of old it was don't go near a car or get in or talk to a stranger. Now it is you have to talk to a stranger and get in the car or you'll offend them brigade. And for all the resignations being called for, those Muslims on the local councils of our northern towns should be the first. All those Islamic communities in Manchester, Leeds, Liverpool, Birmingham and Coventry should be monitored and the police patrolled all the time. As when these guys are not in the local mosque, they're out grooming, chatting, giving presents, laughing and mixing with your daughters and granddaughters. And if you think it is all innocent, you're more of a fool than the media, and that's saying something. We also have the unpleasant thought that one of the Rotherham Council retards came up with a phrase in that it is now part of growing up in this culture. The very sad point is, she's right. Many of these underage girls want a Muslim Asian or a Pakistani boyfriend. These guys have houses, cars, and they have money made from the bodies of all the idiots who have gone before. A few, but not all, these so-called victims have in all essence asked for it and don't like what they get. There are always varying degrees of dependency on abductors, and these abductors have been making a living for well over the last 30 years in many northern towns, and it has become endemic in the northern cultures, and the police and the councils have been made aware, certainly from the nationalist point of view, since 2001. That is since the media grudgingly printed a few lines of misinformation, usually by Norfolk, who got an award no less for doing even less than the local imam. I have researched this problem for many years, and when Nick Griffin joined the EU it became possible for me to obtain documents and go to conferences that otherwise would have been unavailable to a nationalist. I've heard stories that would make your hair curl, and the sheer volume of not just ignorance but deliberate and willful ignoring of Muslim sexual grooming is at last coming home to roost. Although Leo McKinstry blames multiculturalism for the Rotherham abuse, this is not just a new local Rotherham problem, but a national problem, and one that stems from the numbers of Muslims and their families that we have allowed voted in governments to stay in this country. The problem of the jihadis pales with this homegrown business built on the bodies of very young and fertile non-Muslims, and it has paid off in 2 ways. Firstly, it provides a very healthy living for thousands of young Muslims pimping for their friends and relations, and secondly, it does in many cases render the actual girls being used thus infertile and drug and alcohol dependent. In short, no use for breeding to the white race. So the choice is yours in these towns. Are you going to put up and shut up forever? If it was my daughter, I wouldn't, and I would go to the pits of hell to get revenge. But perhaps I'm different from you. But I'd hope not. And finally, 2 for 1 day Monday. A young man married a beautiful woman who had previously divorced 10 husbands. On their wedding night she told her new husband, "Please be gentle, I'm still a virgin." "What?" said the puzzled groom. "How can that be if you've married 10 times?" Well, husband number 1 was a sales rep. He kept telling me how great it was going to be. Husband 2 was in software services. He was never really sure how it was supposed to function, but he said he'd look into it and get back with me. Husband number 3 was from field services. He said that everything checked out diagnostically, but he just couldn't get the system up. Husband 4 was in telemarketing. Even though he knew he had the order, he didn't know when he would be able to deliver. Husband 5 was an engineer. He understood the basic process, but he wanted 3 years to research, implement and design a new state-of-the-art method. Husband 6 was from administration. He thought he knew how, but he wasn't sure whether it was his job or not. Husband 7 was in marketing. Although he had a product, he was never sure how to position it. Husband 8 was a psychiatrist. All he ever did was talk about it. Husband 9 was a gynaecologist. All he ever did was look at it. Husband 10 was a stamp collector. All he'd ever do was lick it. But now I've married you, I'm so excited. Wonderful, said the husband, but why? You're an MP. This time I know I'm going to get screwed. And how Moses got the 10 commandments. One day God went to the Arabs and said, I have some commandments for you that will make your lives better. The Arabs asked, what are the commandments? And the Lord said, they are rules for living. Can you give us an example, said the Arabs. Thou shalt not kill. Not kill? We're not interested. So he went to the blacks and said, I've some commandments. The blacks wanted an example. And the Lord said, honour thy father and mother. Father? We don't know who our fathers are. We're not interested. Then he went to the Mexicans and said, I have some commandments. The Mexicans also wanted an example, and the Lord said, thou shalt not steal. Not steal? We're not interested. Then he went to the French and said, I've got some commandments. The French too wanted an example, and the Lord said, thou shalt not commit adultery. Not commit adultery? We're not interested. Finally, he went to the Jews and said, I've some commandments. Commandments, they said. How much are they? They're free. Or take 10. There, that should offend just about everybody. You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart and I wish you all a very good night. Ukraine crisis clashes near Luhansk airport ahead of talks. Thought for the day, is it too little, too late? And finally, 2 for 1 day Monday. UK news. 13 years ago, Arshad Hussain was accused of abusing 18 girls in Rotherham and police dismissed concerns. Now, though officers are investigating Hussain, who these days is confined to a wheelchair following a shooting. 18 girls, some as young as 12, allegedly named Arshad Hussain as their boyfriend in interviews with social workers in 2001. But Hussain was not questioned about the allegations, and police are only investigating the 39-year-old father in the wake of last week's report into the Rotherham scandal by Professor Alexis J. Yesterday, one alleged victim said it was unbelievable young girls had not been protected. The former deputy leader of Rotherham Council, Jahangir Akhtar, is a cousin of Hussain and lives a few doors from his family home. Mr Akhtar was town of Raqqa, using the name Hussain al-Britani or Sakina Hussain after converting to Islam and taking up ISIS fanatical views. On one Twitter profile claiming to belong to Hussain al-Britani, she posts, quote, proclaiming that the only religion is Islam and calling on others to fight them till all opposition ends. And last week another message said, my husband is away at training camp at the moment refreshing his kafar killing skills. Don't cry though, he'll be back soon, smiley face. Her husband, who she met online, is believed to be extremist Junaid Hussain, who travelled to Syria while on police bail, suspected of violent disorder. World at 8, I give up. We let them in, educate them, let them marry and then let them go off to fight against Christianity and unbelievers. Nine arrested after Chelmsford immigration raids at Omar's Tandoori and Yasmin Indian Brasserie. 9 are issued with a private hire vehicle licence in September 2011, despite councillors knowing of his convictions. He was granted a Hackney carriage licence last March. Both licences were revoked last week after a member of the public raised concerns about him. Liberal Democrat Mayor Subhan Shafiq stepped down after he was found to have personally vouched for the convicted rapist, describing the man as being of good current character. The chairman and vice chairman of the licensing committee, Gladstone Mackenzie and Stuart Burke, have also resigned. World at 8. Will the rapist cab driver be deported or fined? No, nothing will happen to him. He will just vanish into the black Asian economy on our benefits. British rock singer and mum of two Sally Jones in Syria fighting for Islamic State. Mum of two Sally Jones is thought to be a former rock singer in her 40s from Chatham, Kent, who was once the lead guitarist in a 1990s girl band. But she now lives in the Syria and accused in a report in the Times last year of helping to arrange a deal where Hussein returned one of his young alleged victims who had gone missing from home to the police. Mr Akhtar has denied protecting Hussein or knowing about any inappropriate relationships. Milton Keynes taxi rate row. Sex crime taxi driver is still working. Milton Keynes council leader Peter Marland said he thought Milton Keynes cabs were safe. A taxi driver convicted of sexual offence has not had his taxi licence taken away, the council has said. He is one of 7 Milton Keynes drivers found to have criminal convictions in a council investigation. The inquiry came after a convicted rapist had both his private hire and Hackney carriage licences revoked last week. A council spokesman said the issue was at its highest priority and it was preparing to interview all drivers it had concerns about. The driver, convicted of 4 sexual assaults including rape, had been
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number 1 in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Monday the 1st of September 2014. 13 years ago, Arshid Hussain was accused of abusing 18 girls in Rotherham and police dismissed concerns. Milton Keynes taxi rate row, sex crime taxi driver still working. British rock singer and mum of 2 Sally Jones in Syria fighting for Islamic State. 9 arrested after Chelmsford immigration raids at Omar's Tandoori and Yasmin Indian Brasserie. Mohammed is the most popular name in Oslo. EU threatens Russia with more sanctions. Turkish festival funds Rochester New York Mosque.